this locker connector was not happy that it was physically rubbing it. And I see why, is because this pressed in bushing is no longer pressed in. Now we have our vehicle up on the lift. We're going to take a look at a couple more things here. First thing, while we still have the tires on here, we want to check. We already checked our front wheel bearings when it was on the ground, but now we want to check our rear wheel bearings, which are really easy to check on these on a semi-float axle. This has a bearing pressed onto the axle here. So if we get any play in this tire up and down, it's going to be that wheel bearing. So I have a little bit from the suspension, but nothing on the wheel bearings. So these wheel bearings are tight. They're good. No noise. We got a little bit of brake noise there, but nothing on the actual wheel bearings. No bearing noises. So this side's good. We're going to give the other side a quick check on our axle bearing, wheel bearing as well. Got a little bit on the suspension component through there that we're hanging loose, but then we check it this way. We don't have any because that's just the axle moving up and down. So again, this wheel bearing again, same thing, good and tight, good to go. So be right back. We'll get the tires on. We're going to give her a quick overview, take a good look at what we got, taking note of what we found earlier with a couple of control arm bushings and such. We're going to dive further into them. But at first, we just want to give it a general overview to see what we have going on everywhere else. We're going to start with the brakes, and we're going to work in from there. So looking at the side here, we see that somebody's recently put a wheel bearing on here because it's nice and shiny. And we found there was no play, so that makes sense. So there's no play in the wheel bearing because there is a new one. The rotor itself is in pretty good shape. Starting to build a little bit of a ridge here on the end, but that's just standard brake going on. We're going to take a look at our brake pads. And the first thing we do see right away, right off the bat here, we see we are missing the stainless steel wear clip. As you look up here on top, you'll see that we have the stainless steel clip in here that goes between the brake pad and the actual mount for it. And then on the bottom here, we see that it is in fact missing. So what that'll do is that'll end up wearing that brake pad will start wearing into here and then won't be able to slide back and forth as it should. So that'll something that should be addressed in a relatively short amount of nature, but it's not an immediate concern. It's not like we need to red tag this thing and not be able to drive it anymore, but that does need to be addressed at some point. And then we're going to take a look at our thickness of our brake pads. And our thickness is measured from the actual steel backing. And then you actually have the brake pad material itself is right there, and then that's the rotor. So we see we got plenty of brake material left on the inside. There's plenty on the outside pad as well. We do notice that we have less material here at the bottom of the brake shoe, at the brake pad, than we do at the top of the brake pad. So that's telling us that the caliper is actually sticking and starting to do this every time he hits the brakes. So every time he hits the brakes, the bottom is pushing out, the top is not. That's typically an indicator of these slide pins being stuck. So probably this upper slide pin has a little more resistance to it than this bottom one, but that could also be being caused by the fact that this piece of stainless steel is missing out of here. This might have a little groove in here, keeping the caliper from running to slide evenly. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And of course, we're going to jump to the other side and take a look again at our brake pads again. And again, we have our stainless steel clip. And see here we have the stainless steel clip in here, and it's missing from the other side. We're going to look at our brake pad material again. Again, we're good thickness. And this one here, it's not actually full of dirt, so you can actually see it. There is a little groove cut in the middle of the brake pads. And you can see it right there. You can see that little tiny dot right there. That's actually a groove in the brake pad. And that is actually your wear indicator. Once you get down to that point, that's when you are out of brake material, and that's when you're almost time that you need to start changing your brake pads. So this still has some good life left in it, depending upon how much gets run in the dirt. But this probably still has an easy 6 months to a year worth of brake pad on it. Brake pad material doesn't wear away really fast unless you're doing a lot of mudding. As we move inward, we're going to take a closer look at our U-joint, which we identified earlier is potentially starting to go bad. And as we see, we do have a little bit of rust starting to form right there. And you can see it more readily now that we're here underneath the vehicle. And you can see it again right there, that little line. Because as we move over to the other cross, See, this one here has still got good lube on it, and this one's still got good lube on it. So that's a sign that this U-joint is getting close to being time to be replaced. Also, while we're looking here, we do see that we do have some gear lube coming out here on the axle. That's where all this darkness is coming from. That is gear lube coming from the differential itself. So we want to investigate our inner axle seal is probably leaking, and that's why we have this going on out here. As we keep moving in, we're going to take a look at our springs. Our springs are good. Our bump stops are good. Take a look at our shock. Our shock bushings are good on the top. Shock shaft is nice and clean. No oil residues on the shock shaft. Lower shock bushing. It has a little bit of wear, but nothing to be concerned of. You know, it's sitting there. It's all good. It's not falling apart. Our lower control arm bushing, this is one of the ones that we determined does have a little bit of play, in that our bolt is actually loose, and we can actually see it right here. You can actually see, it's going to be hard to see on the camera, but you can actually see between the nut and that washer, you can actually see that there is a gap there. And that is indicative of any type you have this type of skid plate, which comes up over top of this. What it's doing is it's getting stuck on this and not actually falling flat against. So that way, this is never actually, you can't actually tighten this. I mean, or you're not gonna be able to tighten it by hand. You're definitely gonna need to use a big air gun on it to get that to tighten up. So we're gonna come back and tighten that up once we get it back on the ground. Because if we tighten it in the air, all it's gonna do is make it squeak. So we're gonna tighten that one up once it gets back on the ground. Here, our upper control arm joint is in good shape. We're gonna come back and check it with the wrench here in a second. But that one looks good. Again, here you see what happens with this skid plate. You can actually see that it is physically broken. Come around here, you see where it was welded on, the weld has failed, and then the metal has torn here, down through here, and this way. This is physically separated. This is no longer attached to the skid plate. So that'll need to be addressed, and addressed before this actual vehicle can actually leave, because at this point, this bolt is now going to be loose. So we'll take care of that right away. As we come across the front axle, we're going to take a look at our yoke. We're not leaking any fluid here, so that's good. We're going to take a look at our drive shaft U-joint. It's in good shape. We don't have any play in the U-joint itself. We wiggle it back and forth, up and down. We're going to check our slider. We have a little tiny bit of play, which is common in any one of these sliders. They will always have a little bit of play in them. Nothing to be concerned with. And then really hard to see with this one with the full skid plate, but we are going to do the same thing with this upper cardon joint, which you might not be able to see on the camera at all. But I don't feel anything drastic. Like I said, just a little bit in that slider, so our front drive shaft is in good shape. We're going to check out these control arm joints while we're here. We're good. We're not bound up. This one's good. And again, down to this skid plate here. This skid plate seems to be doing okay. Again, we see that it's a little bound up here. Needs a little bit of attention. Just with a wrench, when we get it back on the ground, we'll get it tightened up. Shock on this side, our shock bushing's good. Shock shaft is good, not leaking any oil. Upper bushing's good. Our coil spring is there, looks fine. We still have our bump stop in. And here, oh, there's one of our rattles. And there will just be a bolt that goes down through it. We'll just need to tighten that up, and that'll get rid of that. Nothing to be concerned with on that one. Now, here we have something drastically out of place. As we noticed earlier, we noticed this locker connector was not happy that it was physically rubbing it. And I see why. Is because this pressed in bushing is no longer pressed in. That bushing is actually pressed out of the housing that way. That bushing should be all the way into that lip. And this, I see it actually physically broke the connector by pushing outward. This bushing physically broke that connector. So again, that'll have to be something that has to get addressed here if he wants our locker to work. So we'll have to get on that, and we'll have to fix this right away as well. As we look at other things we have here in the front, we're going to take a look at this U-joint. Again, this one looks pretty good shape. All the seals look about the same. Again, starting to look a little bit dry around that seal right there. See, that still has a snap ring on there. That one still there has its snap ring. Again, you see that slight little rust line starting to form. That's showing some age on that U-joint. Again, the other cross seems to be perfectly fine. Again, we have a little bit of oil buildup here, which would be oil that has come from the differential itself. So again, we'll have to investigate to see if that is coming from the center section and if it's currently leaking at this time. Take a look at our sway bar. Here we see our sway bar bushing is a little out of angle on here. So we'll have to put a bar in it. We'll see if there's any play in there. This side here looks good. I don't see any clunking around in that section. As we move up, we do notice some shiny material right here. So that is from the physical sway bar is physically coming in contact with that. That was probably one of those squeaks that we heard earlier when it was on the ground and we were moving it around. And as we come up here, we see we do have some wear in our sway bar bushing itself too. There's a little bit of a gap we have here. Again, nothing too hateful, but it's something that we should take a look at. Again, this would not need to be addressed. This is still perfectly drivable the way that this is. And then again, on this one here, we have it more dramatic than on the front. We can see that we have a definite difference on the bottom of our brake pad to the top of our brake pad. We see we got a lot of material up here, and then down here at the bottom, we have very little.